Welcome to my presentation today, which is about using situation analysis mapping to understand data. I'm using my current research into best practice in supervising experienced secondary school-based counsellors to depict this. And as some background, all secondary schools in Wales and Northern Ireland and over 60% of secondary schools in England and Scotland have a school counsellor. And it is recommended by all counselling professional bodies in the UK that therapists receive regular supervision. We'll be looking at the use of situation analysis as a research method for issues relating to counselling. Now, situation analysis acknowledges that researchers like myself have experience and knowledge of the subject area being researched, and that often the reason for doing research is to intervene in a situation in order to improve conditions. We will look at the different elements and mapping and how situation analysis helps the researcher get to grips with the complexities of the situation and data, and how this leads to an emerging theory. Now, everything you will see is work in progress and subject to development and change, and it is at this point that I've currently interviewed, transcribed and coded 18 interviews of experienced secondary school-based counsellors with at least 2 years post-qualifying experience and or supervisors working in the UK. And just to put my methodology into some context, very little empirical research has been done regarding the supervision of experienced therapists, so my research was about gaining an understanding rather than measuring. And I chose grounded theory to gain a theoretical understanding of the issues I was researching. And situation analysis can be seen as part of the grounded theory family of methodology and goes on to give insight into the situation, context, action and relationships. We'll be looking at 3 forms of mapping used in situation analysis. There's the situation and relational mapping that lays out all the human and non-human elements in the situation of inquiry and then how they relate. There are the social world and arena maps, and these are about groups with shared commitments. And there's positionality mapping, which analyses the discourses. Now, there are 2 sorts of situational maps, the ordered and the messy. And according to Adele Clark, the founder of situation analysis, these should include all the potentially analytical, pertinent human and non-human material and symbolic or discursive elements in a particular situation. So basically, put in everything you think matters. As this project unfolds, not all will remain of interest, but should be specified to start with. The first one we're going to look at is the ordered situational map. Now, the categories for the elements are listed on the left, and examples of the elements are seen opposite on the right-hand side. These have been colour-coded so you can have an idea of what happens to them in the following messy map. There are far more elements than there is space to give here, but I've included these in the messy maps in the next slide. Now, for those of you who are familiar with analysing qualitative research, the elements do not come out of the codes I used in analysing the interviews, but rather from who the actors or actants are involved in the topic area. Now, all these elements are then transferred onto a messy map, which is where I think most of my creative out-of-the-box thinking happens. The next slide will show how I think about the relationships between elements and how it helps me understand the data. But first, so you have an idea how I use these maps to help understand data, we will be looking at the data that emerged around the theme of safeguarding in supervision and how the maps help me understand and make sense of the narratives that were emerging. Now, safeguarding is just one of the many themes which have emerged during the course of this research. Now, this slide shows the focus on the element of safeguarding. And if you have a look in the background, the words in grey are where the links to the elements are less strong. And if you can imagine how the lens changes when you look at the data through different lenses. So, for example, if you look through the lens of safeguarding in relationship to the client and young person's view, particularly on information sharing, and then how that might impact on therapeutic work, and then compare that to the relationship between safeguarding and the school management team, and how there is a need for robust systems and procedures in place to address safeguarding as far as they're concerned. Now, all this helps to open up and think about the data that I have. Now, the next maps are to do with social groups. Again, this helps to look at and understand the data in different ways. The map here shows the young person or client group arena in grey and the involvement of the different groups and social worlds. As you can see, this can be quite complex with overlapping worlds. And I've created another slide to show how other social worlds can fit into the overlapping worlds. And there are many of these smaller social worlds I could include here, but for simplicity's sake today, I've just included 3. So, for example, in the school social world, I might have Ofsted. And if you have a look at the school counselling service, we've got the professional body of the BACP. And in thinking about safeguarding, we've got the designated safeguarding lead here in the school, but as you can see how that's positioned over a number of social worlds. Now, in thinking about safeguarding itself, it was opened up and it becomes much more of just thinking about the designated lead. And as you can see, I've created a social world around safeguarding itself. And if you think about that, you can imagine then how my lens changes and how I might see the data. So I've spoken so far about how data can be viewed and opened up. We are now going to look at positionality maps and the data itself. Now, sometimes statements are made that seem to contradict one another or seem to be at either end of the polarity. And in order to understand some data that came out about safeguarding, I created an axis. So on the left, I've got helpful supervisory conversations, and down below, I've got the sharing information about safeguarding issues as a result of supervision. And if we look at what scored highly on both, we can see that it's, what scored highly on the sharing information but low on the helpful supervisory conversations, we can see that it's being told to share information by the supervisor and feeling disempowered because the counsellor knew this anyway. So these are experienced counsellors who would have knowledge of safeguarding and did not need to be told what to do. And the conversations needed were more subtle and in depth, and it was the skill of the supervisor to facilitate this. And if we look at what scored highly in helpful conversations but low about information sharing, we had being able to air safeguarding concern without it needing to go further if not needed. And this covered the trust the counsellor had that the supervisor wouldn't judge them for not knowing, was also about the supervisor's knowledge in safeguarding, where conversations could be had about complex situations where it wasn't always clear what was needed to be done. And finally, what scored highly in both areas, we've got the supervisor helped develop the counsellor's sensitivity in trusting their own judgment. And here the role of the supervisor is also seen as supporting the counsellor in their own development, increasing their confidence, understanding and ability to work in this particular context. And out of this is an emerging theory on safeguarding and supervision of experienced school-based counsellors. And at the foundation is the supervisor's sound knowledge about safeguarding, which is present for the supervisor to be confident about discussions about complex situations, and the supervisee to be able to trust this. And built on this is the supervisory relationship, which needs to be present in order to have often quite difficult conversations where, for example, the supervisee might feel vulnerable or anxious. And next comes the supervisor's skill in facilitating the session, so the supervisee is able to think and make decisions themselves, which leads to the supervisee's decision on action or inaction, and all this as a solid base for the safe therapeutic work with the client. So what we've done today is look at the forms of mapping within situation analysis and how they are used to open up and understand data and develop an emerging theory. Thank you for your interest today.